Earlier today in Newsweek, the political science professor Max Abrams published an article about President Biden's multi-pronged personal, financial, and family involvement in Ukraine under the headline, quote, "Does Ukraine have compromat on Joe Biden?" As probably most of you know, compromat is the very sophisticated word that people really in the know use when talking about blackmail, and they use the Russian term for it because they're Russia experts. It was Russia that invented the concept of blackmail, apparently, just like they invented the concept of whataboutism. And so that's how you know that somebody is really sophisticated and insightful when they use the word compromat. And of course, they spent 4 years alleging that Russia had seized control of the levers of American power by wielding compromat, namely blackmail information, over President Trump. And the essence of the article, and we're about to have Professor Abrams on so he can describe it himself, and I want to ask him a few questions about this argument, is that there is much more ample basis for believing that Ukraine has a lot of incriminating information about President Biden that, if released, could seriously damage President Biden's political prospects and reputation than there ever was for believing that Moscow had such dirt or leverage over President Trump. So let's bring Professor Abrams on and we can talk about the article. Good evening. Are you able to hear me well? I hope you can, and I want to welcome you to System Update. It's great to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. So let's just go ahead and dive right into this article first. I do have some issues I want to ask you around it, but the argument you essentially make is that there is good reason to believe, even if a little bit of it is tongue-in-cheek using the word compromat, that the Ukrainian government very well might have dirt on President Biden that could be very incriminating. Of course, the first impeachment of President Trump was based on Trump's suspicion that they had a lot of this dirt, and he was trying to convince them to release it on the grounds that the public had the right to know, given that Biden was going to run for president, and the Congress decided that that was impeachable for him to do, given his use of leverage in terms of Ukrainian aid. So what is your argument, or what is the evidence you point to that suggests that the Ukrainians might have this kind of dirt on Biden?
Well, you're right. I am sort of mocking legacy media. I would never have, thought of the idea of using the word compromat if not for the fact that we were just inundated with this word during the Trump presidency. We were told that there were all sorts of, manifestations of the compromat, or examples of it, or types of it. But the biggest one we were told about was the so-called P-tape that Moscow had on Trump, which of course Hillary Clinton, her project in the Steele dossier as part of the Russia collusion hoax, they just contrived that all together. And mainstream media just relentlessly said, that Russia has compromat on Trump. They have video of this P-tape of prostitutes peeing on Trump. But it was actually quite serious because they then used that in order to say that Trump was an agent or asset of Russia, that he didn't have freedom of movement because they had this compromising material. And of course, it was all made up. Essentially, what I'm doing in the article is asking, is it possible that actually Ukrainian officials have compromat on Joe Biden? And I think that the evidentiary basis is stronger, certainly, than during the Trump administration. When we talk about Joe Biden's corruption, conceptually, I think about it in two components. The first is his shady relationship with Burisma, which enabled him, as well as his son, to get over $10 million in payments. So there's that aspect of it. And then the other related aspect is his intervention when he was vice president to fire the prosecutor who was on the cusp of divulging the Biden's Burisma shadiness to the public.
So let me just interject there, because That part is something I find so remarkable, that there's always this kind of intense projection going on with the way in which Democrats talk about President Trump, accusing him of doing all sorts of things that, whether he does it or not, is certainly something the Democrats do. And the parallels between what Biden did in Ukraine and that first impeachment, where Trump was accused of interfering in Ukraine, demanding changes in their internal affairs, namely the release of information about their investigation into Burisma and Biden in order to continue U.S. aid to Ukraine, was exactly what Vice President Biden did when he threatened the Ukrainians to withhold aid if they didn't fire the prosecutor involved in the Burisma case. Let's just show the video. You probably have seen this before. This is President Biden speaking in 2018 at the Council of Foreign Relations, where he boasts about the fact that he got this prosecutor fired. That was the level in which the United States was micromanaging Ukraine. So you have the Vice President of the United States, obviously very fixated on who the prosecutor, the corruption prosecutor, is supposed to be in Ukraine, and we're supposed to believe that it had nothing to do with the fact that the company paying his son $80,000 a month was in the crosshairs of the Ukrainian authorities, but instead was just this kind of good government concern that everyone in the EU shared. Let's listen to President Biden, or then he was then candidate Biden, talking about his work as vice president in Ukraine.
I'll give you one concrete example. I was, not but it just happened to be, that was the assignment I got. I got all the good ones.
Do you see, he says, back then, well, it wasn't me. It was just a coincidence that it was me, because that was the assignment they gave him. He was very defensive about his own choice of words when he said, I called the Ukrainians. And then listen to the rest of what he said.
Ukraine. And I remember going over, convincing our team, or others, to convincing us that we should be providing for loan guarantees. And I went over, I guess, the 12th, 13th time to Kyiv, and I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to the press conference. I said, no, I said, we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Oh, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid at the time.
All right, so that's his story. What do you make of that?
Well, it's unbelievable. I mean, the evidence is right in front of us all. Remember, there was a big dispute about, the nature of Trump's conversation with Zelensky, but there's no dispute about what's going on here. What he says, just so everybody is clear, is that he personally spearheaded the firing of this prosecutor, that it came mainly due to his initiative, that he convinced the president. He knew that Obama would rubber stamp his decision. And furthermore, that he then would replace, or did replace, Shokin, the prosecutor at that time, who was investigating Burisma. He would replace him with someone solid. And that's kind of interesting, because we know that A, Shokin was investigating Burisma. B, Shokin believes, actually, that the Biden family is very corrupt, and that the information that would have emerged in the course of the investigation would be extremely damning to the Bidens. And C, upon Shokin's removal, that replacement put the kibosh on the Burisma investigation. That's what Joe Biden meant when he said he was going to put in somebody solid. It was all for the Bidens' personal benefit. It had nothing to do with rooting out a corrupt prosecutor, which was the excuse that Biden gave. That narrative doesn't make any sense, because the replacement was not interested in investigating Burisma, which was well known to be an extraordinarily corrupt Ukrainian energy company.
So just to underscore that point, here is an article from the Kiev Post, which is now one of those English-speaking Ukrainian newspapers that has been presented as a highly credible source when it comes to the war in Ukraine. I believe they had some change of ownership and they're now operating under a slightly different name, but this was at the time a newspaper widely considered by Western sources to be very reliable. And they have this article in January of 2017. So after President Trump was elected, right before he was inaugurated. And the headline of it was just to remember in real time what was being said before it became necessary to protect President Biden. Here's the headline: all cases closed against Burisma Group and its president in Ukraine. The company cooperated with law enforcement agencies and paid in full all outstanding fees. And then the subheadline is International Energy Group Burisma, with assets in Ukraine, announces that all legal proceedings and pending criminal allegations against its president and operating companies of Bur International Energy Group have ceased. This is from the prosecutor that took Shokin's place after Biden got him fired. And the article reads, quote, the decision to fully close all pending legal proceedings and criminal allegations was the result of many months of full cooperation between the Office of the General Prosecutor and the legal team representing the Burisma Group. Further, the Burisma Group agreed that should an investigation determine that the Burisma Group owed outstanding taxes and fees, it would pay all of them. So they tried to spin it, the prosecutor did and Burisma did, as though it was some kind of confession of guilt and some kind of amazing recovery of assets for the Ukrainian people, but the investigation just disappeared. There were no prosecutions, no jail time, no anything. Is there any doubt at all that Biden's intervention in getting this prosecutor fired, which he boasted about being the person who did it, directly benefited the company paying his son?
Well, there's another video, which I know you've seen because we both tweeted it. And that's video testimony by the prosecutor, Victor Shokin, who is the guy we're talking about, who was fired. And what
so since you mentioned that, let me just show that, and then you can continue. I just want everybody to be able to watch it.
Because, Glenn, for me, the combination of those two videos, it makes it really compelling.
It seems very dispositive, doesn't it? I mean, when I listen to Victor Shokin speaking, he seems very credible to me. He's obviously a smart guy. He's very well informed. He conducts himself professionally. And let's just listen to that video that you referenced so that people can hear it for themselves. And then go ahead and I want to hear the rest of your analysis on this.
Если вести речь о том, что эти дела были якобы спящие, то можно привести очень яркие примеры, а именно наши действия после того, как в Великобритании сняли запрет на 23 миллиона Злачевского, я назначил служебное расследование, возбудил уголовное дело, которое касалось, каким образом были сняты и почему были сняты эти деньги, арестованные в Великобритании. Больше того, практически за 10-12 дней до написания мной заявления об уходе судом 2 февраля 2016 года были арестованы активы Злачевского, его личные сбережения, имущество, машины и так далее. В ходе следствия, которое мы проводили до этого, были наложены аресты также на скважины, на иные материальные блага Злачевского. То, что пытаются преподнести как спящим, на самом деле это неправда. Я прекрасно понимаю, что США располагают, наверное, одной из самых сильных разведок в мире. И, естественно, за процессом расследования Буризмы очень внимательно смотрели не только легальным путем, но и нелегальным.
So I'm going to stop it there. It's not in English. We have the English subtitles on the screen for those listening in podcast version and those interested in hearing the rest. He's essentially saying, look, we were actively investigating Burisma. We definitely believe that they were corrupt. There was a very aggressive investigation in which we seized the assets of the Burisma president. And we were also intending to start investigating Hunter Biden and other people who were helping Burisma facilitate all of this corruption and to stay protected. The United States government knew exactly what we're doing. They were spying on us illegally, as they usually do. And it was Joe Biden's intervention, which he says was absolutely motivated by an attempt to protect his son and to protect Burisma, that ended up letting Burisma off the hook. Now, the defenders of Joe Biden say that all Joe Biden was doing was carrying out the official position of the EU, that this prosecutor wasn't aggressive enough. But what do you make of this very detailed version of events that is clearly backed up by real-time media accounts?
In a way, that second video is even more important because Democrats haven't disputed the first video, the Joe Biden video, because it's so well known. There's no dispute that Biden fired the prosecutor. What they argued is that he was fired because he was a corrupt guy. We were engaged in anti-corruption at the time in Ukraine, and it had nothing to do with the, bribery scheme with Burisma. Over and over again, the media said that the investigation into Burisma was quote unquote dormant. If your listeners do a search on dormant and Burisma, they will get loads of hits. Correct. Because that was a talking point that was shared to the T across mainstream media. I don't know exactly the timestamp on this Shokin video, but it seems to me that he is directly rebutting that talking point because, at least based on the translation, he uses that exact word. And what he says explicitly is that the investigation was far from dormant, that the founder of Burisma had recently, very recently, within the past 10 days, had his assets seized. And that Shokin and his team were rapidly moving forward and closing in on the Bidens, and that the Bidens knew that, and that was the basis for him being fired. He further goes on to say that, contrary to the smear against him, that he wasn't regarded as a corrupt leader, as a corrupt prosecutor, and that actually he had frequently received accolades for the perseverance and diligence of his anti-corruption efforts by very important people, including the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, including all sorts of European ambassadors to Ukraine. And so together we have, Biden bragging that he fired Shokin, and Shokin making it what I think a very compelling case that the firing was done in order to protect the Biden racket.
Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.